Hello and welcome back to the Toffee YouTube channel, your source for all things Everton. My name's Thomas, back today with Paul Brown. Of course, Paul's been on the channel before, where we discussed our potential new owners, 777. We've been waiting a long time to see if that's ever going to be confirmed. Maybe it won't be. We'll have to divulge that in this video. But Paul, thank you very much for coming back on. How are you doing?
I'm okay, very well. Yes, you?
Yeah, kind of trying to wait for this appeal, wait for the takeover potentially being announced. It's definitely potentially a busy couple of weeks coming up for Everton, but we will have to see how that gets on. Now, the last time we spoke, just before Christmas, it's been quite a while now. I think I probably expected by when it was officially announced that maybe the takeover would have gone through by now. I mean, it's been several months. We've had several briefings over those months that the takeover is imminent, but it's not. So we'll kind of start there. Then why? I mean, in your opinion, is it that the media are constantly briefed that the takeover is going to happen any minute, and yet it's now pushing the end of February, and we've still heard nothing else?
So I think there's a couple of things. If you're the party that's trying to take over the club, then it's in your interest to sound confident and optimistic and to be continually telling people that you're confident this is going to go through and that all is well. The problem for Everton is I don't think Everton or its current executives are being kept terribly well informed either by the current owner um, or by the prospective buyers. You have to remember it's basically an interim board at Everton at the moment. Everything there is in flux, and the people at Everton who are good people are relying on briefings which they're getting largely from the prospective buyer, who obviously has a reason to sound positive and confident. So, usually in these processes, you take those kind of things with a pinch of salt until you've heard from the other side. That's not to say that the Premier League have been briefing on this every week. They have not. They have tried to stay as silent as possible. Sometimes things leak. Sometimes journalists like us hear stuff from in and around the Premier League. But there has clearly been a problem here for several weeks. And the fact that we were told the Premier League um, chose to put extra questions to 777 about their future funding plans and ability to fund their current operations last Thursday obviously shows that the Premier League is still not satisfied. I think you only have to refer back to what Richard Masters said in front of the select committee to get a good idea that even then the Premier League had not had satisfactory answers to the questions that they had put. And this week's update is that AM Best, a very good credit ratings agency, has again downgraded 777's big reinsurance firm, which holds a lot of their assets in Bermuda. And AM Best has said repeatedly that one of the issues here is that the company cannot produce audited accounts, which is also a problem for the Premier League. The other thing that AM Best said is that the reinsurance business's exposure to assets belonging to 777. This includes a huge amount of companies that they run, is a problem for their rating because, in AM Best's words, those assets are illiquid. And this all gives the sign of a company that is currently struggling to maintain its operations. And I think that is what the Premier League is worried about.
Yeah, there's plenty to be worried about with our potential buyers. There's I mean constant reports, obviously from yourself and sometimes others talking about the fact that well we've seen stories about what happens at their other clubs, but it's not just their other clubs that of course they have investments in, they have their own businesses and where the money's coming from. I'd imagine a lot of the Premier League questions are asking about the source of funding and how valid that funding is. Of course, running a Premier League club isn't a cheap operation by any means. Why is it? Do you think that we've still got to the point now where they still don't seem to be able to answer these questions? And as you said, that the closest we probably had to an update was Richard Masters at the select committee, kind of saying, we have questions that they haven't produced the answers to. Why is it that they can't seem to answer these questions?
So I can't speak for 777. That's the question really only they can answer. But it certainly seems that from the Premier League's point of view, they've not been able to provide the answers the Premier League was seeking. I know that 777 repeatedly say that they believe they have answered all these questions, that there's no more information they can or are willing to give, and that it's time basically for the Premier League to make a decision. These decisions are not easily made. Some of these takeovers do drag on for quite a long time. It's not unusual for a club or a party trying to take that club over to have to wait several months. I think the thing that makes this different is that there's been so much back and forth between the two parties. 777 answer what they think are a final round of questions from the Premier League, and then a week, 2 weeks later, they are hit with some more. I think that's probably quite frustrating for them, understandably so. But I think it's important for fans to remember that the Premier League need to do proper due diligence here to make sure that every Premier League club is not put at risk or in danger by a takeover. Essentially, this is true for any club. It's the same process they go through with all club takeovers. And if they are not satisfied that the party trying to buy that club can successfully finance its own operations and the future running of the club, then they will say no. That is simply a fact. So until 777 can satisfy that requirement, it's not going to go through.
Yeah, and there's been plenty of discussion kind of since the beginning about whether this will actually go through. Of course, when the club announcement came, maybe people thought that this would be wrapped up a bit quicker than it is. If you look at, let's say, Sir Jim Ratcliffe over at United, for example, that seemed fairly quick from start to finish, and people might look at that and say, well, how come this is taking so long? But it's not necessarily. People haven't only necessarily been saying that it's taking so long. There's been plenty been said about whether it's actually going to go through at all. Of course, the Esk on Twitter has been fairly consistent since the beginning that he doesn't think that the takeover will go through. What's your opinion now on that?
I wouldn't like to say either way, but I think that the last week things have moved considerably against 777, and what the chances are of them getting this deal done is it's very difficult to say and predict. What I will say is that it seems clear to us at Josmiar, and from what we've reported from sources both inside and outside the company, and from all of the financial documentation that we've seen and the various lawsuits which are racking up in courts in the US on unpaid debts, that this is a company struggling to raise finance. And it seems to us and to others, in fact, that 777 may need Everton more than Everton need 777.
And Mashiri said early on that he decided that this group were the best potential owners for Everton, and it's almost been made out at times like they're the only group seemingly invested. I mean, of course, the MSP talks kind of dragged on last summer. That then fell through. Then 777 offered a much higher stake, but it's definitely not the case, is it, that 777 are the only group that would potentially want to buy Everton?
No, it's not, and they also have no exclusivity, which makes the process, which makes them vulnerable, I suppose, to an outside party coming in. I know when we reported in Josmiar that there are two other US groups interested in making a bid for the club. I think that the current state of play is that it's going to be difficult for one of those parties to step in and get that done, because it would require many of the current creditors to take a haircut simply because of the amount of debt at the club. But there is another US party which seems very confident that that is not an issue for them. And I think you'll be hearing a lot more from them over the next few weeks. I can't say very much more about that, partly because I don't know exactly who they are. I know some of the people involved in that, but I do not know who is backing that bid at the moment. What I will say is that they will be put under exactly the same scrutiny as 777 were, if this is ever to become a firm bid, because it isn't at the moment. And we will see how the process develops. But I know that outside of those two parties, there were others interested in buying the club way back before a deal was ever announced for an agreement with 777. And some of the questions that I think many people have are why the owner did not talk to some of those people in any great detail, really. It seemed very early on in this process that there were only two groups he was willing to do business with. One was MSP, owned by Jarmner Jaffe. And I have to say that when we looked into them, we only really heard overwhelmingly positive feedback from people who had dealt with them before, from businesses they were currently involved with. But that deal didn't get off the ground and wasn't, I have to say, a particularly great deal for Everton. So you can understand why the creditors involved essentially pulled the plug from that one. But there were other people out there, and Moshiri doesn't seem to have really engaged with them at any great level, which is strange, I would say, from someone who seems desperate to sell the club. So we are in this position where he chose to move forward with 777, and we are currently stuck because everyone is awaiting a decision. And Moshiri obviously could walk away if he wants to. 777 could walk away if they want to. I don't think they are in a position to keep funding the club forever while they wait for approval from the Premier League. And I don't think that Moshiri is in a position to wait forever either, frankly. Nobody knows exactly whether his decision to stop funding Everton is because he can't fund Everton anymore, or because he's just decided he doesn't want to. But either way, it's a situation that cannot be allowed to keep drifting. And I think in the next 2 weeks, and certainly by the end of March, we will have a resolution to this one way or another.
Yeah, it's about time the fans got clarity, if not a bit after the point where the fans deserved clarity about this. And you mentioned there that the debts that the club have ran up, and the fact that we do know that 777 have effectively just been funding the club for the past however many months. That kind of debt is now approaching 200 million. Now, if the deal doesn't go through and then 777 then withdraw, that money's still going to be owed to them. It is technically a loan. So it's kind of a double question, really. The fact that we don't exactly know what the terms are of that loan at this point, but the money is loaned. They are going to want it back at some point. Now, kind of how difficult of a position will the club be in if 777 then drop out of the proceedings in regards to the club's kind of financial future, but also any potential new buyer, because we've now in considerable more debt than where we were when this takeover began.
So I can't be too clear on exactly how this works, but what I can say is that that debt is repaid at a different time depending on what happens in this process. So if one thing was to happen, that debt would be repayable immediately. And if something else was to happen, that debt is not repayable until 2026. As far as we can tell, these are loans being made at a rate of 12.7%, 12.75% interest due at maturity. it obviously makes a big difference when those become payable. But this is something that has been factored in by the other parties interested in buying the club. And it's basically impossible to buy Everton now without having this debt paid off at some point. That's clear. When it's paid off, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and of course there's also other debt kind of
Obviously,
persisted.
just to jump in, that's not me saying that the deal is dead and someone else is going to have to pay it off. It's paid off even if 777 end up owning the club because they intend to turn it into equity. But that is still the case here.
Yeah, and of course there are other debts with the club. I mean, considering the stadium, of course, MSP ended up loaning us money for the stadium as well. So plenty of debts to rack up, and it's definitely going to impact any takeover going forwards. Now, recently it was reported that there was quite a few personnel changes at 777. Some pretty key figures departing across the business, but also their football operations. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there's a story again today that they are making large scale redundancies in their Miami and London offices. We do know from internal sources at the company that they were discussing a big headcount reduction plan as long ago as last summer, which it was hoped would save them quite a lot of money. So that those two things would tie up. But I think the more interesting thing here is that in the last 12 months, they have lost some really key people, and some of them have not been replaced. So Josh Wander is the face of the franchise. His right-hand man was a guy called Juan Arciniagas. He was the MD and head of sport. He had a lot of control and influence in the company over all of the sporting acquisitions. He was on the board of some of the football clubs. He left last summer. Their long-standing general counsel, a man named Ed Garris, left last February. He was he's been involved in this business almost since the beginning and was always known as a voice of reason and someone who would sometimes talk them down from riskier investments if he thought those were a bad idea. He left. The COO, Prasad Hedge, left in November. And Peter Myers, who was a principal on their investment team, also left last summer. He's now in court claiming unpaid bonuses and salary. It's not pretty, but I think that the biggest departure, obviously, is that we found out in the last few days that their CFO, the Chief Financial Officer, Damien Alfala, has resigned. So far, there's no word from him on why this has happened, but I would suggest that it's not an ideal time to be losing your chief financial officer when you're trying to complete on the biggest sporting acquisition your company has ever made. He's also a very close ally of both Josh Wander and the other people on the 777 board, and I think losing him is on paper quite a big blow. We have reached out, but we have no answers yet on why this has happened. But it seems like strange timing for this to have happened in the middle of 777 trying to close their biggest sporting purchase. So all of those people leaving and some of them not being replaced suggests that something is going on in the upper echelons of the company. And when you tie that together with the fact that there are multiple reports they are cutting staff in various jurisdictions, having trouble paying bills. They're in court fighting various lawsuits, trying to recover debts, and some of their subsidiary companies are taking out loans from hard money lenders at a rate of 52% APR. It all adds up to a company that is struggling financially to meet its commitments.
It's always it's always great to hear that in a potential takeover. And on that note, I only really have one more question before we wrap up. Is that it's now, well, on the day of recording, it's the 19th of February. We've been waiting for this for, I mean, seemingly months and months now. while Everton fans are kind of worrying about the appeal, this is all going on in the background. At the same time, of course, we have another breach, an alleged breach that we'll find out about towards the end of the season. But aside from the appeal, this is, of course, this is definitely the biggest news at the club. What can fans expect over the next couple of weeks, couple of months? Who knows how long?
I touched on it before, but I think certainly in the next 2 weeks, the situation on the ownership should become a lot clearer. I can't say which way it's going to go. A lot of things could happen. I said before, 777 could walk away, Mashiri could walk away, or the Premier League could either approve or deny the deal. I think it's coming to a point where minds are crystallizing now about this, and we're not far from a resolution to it. And certainly, there are things that need to happen before the end of March, which will decide the future of the club. And I think by then, at the latest, we will all know in whose hands Everton are likely to be for the foreseeable future. I don't think any of this is tied to the Premier League's decision on the appeal, on the points appeal, or the second charge. I think they're two completely separate things. But I am expecting the club to hear back on that appeal shortly as well. I think that's only at most probably a fortnight away. We'll see. And there is also a very interesting case in Delaware that goes to court on March the 19th involving 777. And I think there could be some fireworks there too. So I would say that there is likely to be a whole lot of news on Everton and its future over the next 6 weeks or so. And I don't think fans will have to wait too much longer to find out what's happening. I hope they get clarity because they deserve it, and it's time really that the club was able to move forward, because this limbo should not be allowed to continue much longer, really.
Well, sounds like it's only seemingly going to get busier in the next few weeks, even though it's been a very busy time anyway. To be honest, I thought, Paul, when we after the last video, I thought when we spoke next, we'd either be talking about the fact that the takeover had gone through or it hadn't, and we would have clarity. We obviously still don't, so I'm sure we'll get back together at some point when there is more news over the next 6-7 weeks or so. But thank you very much for coming on again. If our viewers want to find more of you, where can they find you?
Oh, well, please go to the Josmiar website. It's very easy to find. I'm also on Twitter at PB Sports Writer. Everything we write goes on there. More stories to come from us, and yeah, let's hope that let's hope the Premier League come up with a decision and it's the right one.
Certainly. And thank you all very much for watching. I hope this video potentially gives you a bit more clarity on the situation that we find ourselves in. Be sure to check out the rest of the videos we've done on the channel. We've done a few on 777 now. Of course, it's a big week for the club with the appeal coming up, with the potential takeover news coming up. So we'll have plenty to come from us. So do check out the rest of the videos that we come out with. So thank you very much for watching, and join us next time on the Toffee Blues.